Teaching English Radio India.
A radio series for teachers of English.
Brought to you by the British Council. Welcome to the program. Are you sitting comfortably? I'm Bibash Dash, and I'll be introducing the ideas of many teachers from around India. And here are some of the people we'll meet today.
My name is Deena. I'm from Madikeri in Karnataka.
Hi, I'm Shaurya from Jamshedpur in Jharkhand.
I'm Ajay from Delhi.
I'm Sukanya from Guwahati.
I'm Anuja from Gwalpara in Assam.
If you joined us last time, then you'd have met my fellow presenter, Manisha. She discussed how Indian schools are moving towards a more learner-centered approach. Teachers are now encouraged to give students lots of opportunities to really participate and practice their English. But of course, in most state schools, teachers have to use a textbook, which often has a lot of material to get through quickly. And our lesson times are short. On top of that, we have large classes and very different levels of ability. So, the question is, how can we put these learner-centered ideas into practice and make sure our students get the most out of each lesson? Well, that is what we are looking at in Teaching English Radio. We are sharing the thoughts and ideas of teachers and trainers who meet this challenge every day. And they tell us that an important step in the right direction, and our topic for today, comes down to planning. Yes, our subject is planning our lessons. And what do teachers think about it?
Failing to plan is planning to fail. So it's like if you don't know what you're going to do in the class, it becomes really difficult for the teachers as well as for the students to actually focus on the activities of the class.
The main thing is the objectives. The objectives should be clear before the lesson.
Teaching is a very planned activity. It's supposed to be done before a teacher enters the class, not at the point when he's teaching.
What do you think? Let's first meet Deena. She is a teacher, but she also trains others.
Planning a lesson is very important for teachers because every lesson or maybe every unit in different states have a competency or an objective to achieve.
Deena explains that all the different education authorities provide a textbook and a syllabus for schools to follow. It's a framework, and every unit in the book supplies texts and language that teachers are asked to cover. So, our starting point for lesson planning is to understand the learning objectives of the units in the textbook.
It's a good idea to plan your lesson so you will be able to achieve those objectives by the end of the unit. This helps you to achieve key areas maybe in grammar or vocabulary or pronunciation or any other topic that you're looking to work with. Planning definitely allows teachers to anticipate any problems that might arise in their class and be ready to face those problems.
When we've planned our class in advance, we can go well prepared for the problems that will arise. Teacher Shaurya agrees. And she says you should share your objectives with your students as well.
When you're preparing, it's very important to understand the objective of the lesson. If it's not clear, make sure that you clear it in your head so that when you go to the class, your students are told well in advance that by end of this class, we will be learning nouns or we will be learning verbs. So it should be simple and clear objective which can be achievable in that specified time.
Shaurya says that objectives should be simple and clear, and you must be able to achieve them in the time that you have planned. If you have students at higher levels, then you can help them by sharing your objectives. To identify your objectives means looking carefully at your textbook or teacher's book if you are lucky enough to have one. You must then check what new skills and language are being taught in the unit. It is helpful to think about the aims of the lesson in terms of what students should be able to do by the end of the lesson. The purpose is not just to rush through the material, but to be sure that the students have learned something new in English. For example, by the end of the lesson, they'll be able to ask for permission using expressions like can I, could I, and may I. Or, by the end of the lesson, they'll be able to use the new vocabulary to describe traffic and discuss the topic of busy roads. But how can teachers include a variety of activities to give students practice of different skills when lessons are usually very short? The answer is planning. This teacher, Shobha, looks at her course book carefully in advance. She reviews what she has to cover in her lesson and then divides up the time into different planned activities.
I first go through the whole lesson. I try to divide the lesson according to the period I have, and for this class I take one part of the lesson and see how many activities I can plan for that related to that paragraph itself. Like for one paragraph I have more than 2 to 3 activities that will support the text exercises itself. Maybe how I do the activity is different, but what I do is same throughout. So that there is the planning.
Shobha knows that in her next lesson, she has a text to follow in her textbook. It is a paragraph and some exercises. So, she plans activities that will lead her students towards the subject and the language of the text. These are not in her book, they are extra activities on the same theme, which will prepare her students for the paragraph in the book.
Now, Santosh is asking Deepak, tell, will you be my friend?
Will you be my friend?
If I give you a chocolate.
If you give me
If I give you.
If I give you chocolate.
Yes. Thank you.
You are listening to Teaching English Radio, India, brought to you by the British Council.
Our subject today is planning your lessons. Most teachers that we talk to find it is best to divide up their lesson into sections. Often it seems they think of 3 main sections and then they write down their plan. For example, Sukhna says that we can plan a lesson so that it has an introduction, then the body of the lesson, that's the main content, and finally a conclusion. And she also says it is important to start with something motivating.
We can divide the lesson plan into various parts, starting with the introduction. We can introduce a lesson in different ways, and that's the way we motivate the class for a lesson. It may be the testing of one's previous knowledge about the subject matter, because it is always advisable to go from the known to the unknown. So instead of just starting off with something new to the child, we should always start with something which he already knows and try to find out how much he knows about that topic.
Sukhna makes an important point. She says we should plan our teaching so that we move from something the students already know, which could be the students' own ideas or perhaps a revision activity, to what is new, the new learning points in the lesson. Her colleague Anuja agrees.
The 3 steps will be there: preparation, presentation, and application. We have to prepare our students, we have to motivate them while entering the class, and then present what we want them to learn, and then apply our knowledge. It may be classwork, it may be homework. As a teacher, you have to know what they want and how they want, and that works on planning a lesson.
Right in the beginning of the lesson, we are involving the students. We're calling for some active listening and active participation from the students, and then we can go on to our lessons.
Good morning, students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Let's start with what you have done your weekend.
In this class, the teacher Rita is greeting her students and engaging them in some lively personal discussion. It's a warmer and it helps them to start using English and gets them focused for the rest of the lesson.
You have holidays on your Saturdays and Sundays. So can anyone tell me what interesting thing you have done on last weekend?
I watched TV so much and played Ludo.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to community.
So, after starting with something that motivates and warms up our students, what's next? What does Sukhna say we should actually write down on the lesson plan?
So in the lesson plan, we write down how much time we are going to devote and how much of the content are we going to cover. Secondly, we also mentioned there what activities we are going to take. Are we going to make it a group activity or an individual activity? Are we going to do the lesson as a project? And what are the teaching aids we are going to use there? How are we going to interact in the class? How much time are we giving for the question and answers? Because that constant interaction between the teacher and among the student is very important for learning.
She says that once you have divided your lesson into parts, you would first list the different activities and their aims, how much time you expect to spend on each activity, what materials you will use, and how the students will interact. For example, as a whole class, in pairs, in groups, or working alone.
There should be points in the teacher's lesson plan where he is giving scope for the students to ask questions. It cannot be just a one-way process where the teacher is simply delivering her lecture.
Another teacher, Ajay, showed us his lesson plan. This was for a lesson involving a reading text, and he had divided his lesson into 3 sections: pre, while, and then post-reading. On his plan, he had written out what he was going to do in each section and how much time he planned to spend on it.
For pre-reading, I'll assign around 5 to 7 minutes. Then while reading, I'll have around 15 minutes. And then the post-reading, I'll have around another 15 minutes. And maybe the last 5 minutes I would like to keep for the wrapping up of the lesson if there is something left the students might need to learn or might need to know. So last 5 minutes I keep for the students to ask whatever they want to ask related to the topic.
Notice that Ajay leaves some room for wrapping up at the end. Planning how much time you want to spend on each activity is really important. And this, of course, is one of the many skills that teachers develop: planning and managing their time. But it is important to be flexible. Here's Dina again.
Having a lesson plan definitely helps because it allows the teacher to know what to do at every stage of the lesson. And no, it doesn't mean that a teacher should stick rigidly to the lesson plan. It all depends on how the lesson is going with the students. Some sections may need more time, some may need lesser time. It all depends on how the students are reacting to the lesson that you're teaching.
Before we go, let's summarize what teachers have said today about planning their lessons. They say, look at the unit in the textbook and work out carefully what the main learning objectives are for your lesson. What do your students need to do and learn? Put another way, you can say, by the end of the lesson, I want my students to be able to do X. To achieve this objective, divide the time into different activities. For example, a friendly warmer, some pre-teaching, the main activity, some practice, and perhaps some homework. Move from what is already known to what is new. Decide how long to spend on each activity, but be flexible. Aim to have a balance of different skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. A mix of working as a whole class or in pairs and groups, and think about what materials you will use for the different activities. Of course, teachers don't always have the time to write down their lesson plans, but it can be very useful and it is good practice. Another tip is to try visualizing the stages of your lesson in advance. After your lesson, you can review your planning, reflect on how it went, and what you would change in the future. We'll talk more about this subject when we look at how to use our textbooks creatively, and we'll visit more classrooms. I do hope you'll make a date and join us. So it's goodbye from me, Pibashdash, and I wish you happy teaching.